Hi, I'm Cody Anderson, one of the pastors at Parker United Methodist Church. My parents live down in Colorado Springs, and over the last few months, they have been going through all of the boxes that they have had from our childhood and from even their past. And they have this table in their basement that is filled with pictures of all these different things that happened to them. And they've been talking about how fun it is to go through these pictures, to remember these people who are no longer here with us, to remember these moments that have kind of faded from their memories. Part of the joy of my parents going through all of their things is that then, of course, they send them to me so that I can put them in boxes in my basement. But it's been fun to go through some of the things they've been sending me, right? I mean, I've gotten things like pictures of when I was a baby. So, can you see the resemblance? But also I've seen other parts of history. This card that I got from my Catholic priest when we moved to Lyons, who was saying how much he missed us, or a letter that I wrote to Santa Claus that my parents kept for me, or old report cards, right? Now I want y'all to know I was a really good student, so old report cards are good. But I also have these letters that came from people who were important mentors in my life, who reminded me of who I am and who God is. See, history is really important to know where we have come from, what our roots are, what our foundation is. Even if we didn't know the people in our history that were foundational for who we are today, it is so important for us to remember the stories. And so in church on Sunday, we talked about our history as United Methodists. That history that goes back to John Wesley and his brother Charles Wesley, who began a movement called the Methodist movement. They weren't trying to create their own faith, their own religion. They were just trying to get down to their roots, to figure out their beliefs and how they could authentically live out their faith in the world. It didn't feel right for them to do that in the Anglican churches, and so they lived it out differently. So thinking about our roots as a movement of prayer, of fasting, of studying scripture together in community, and then that history of moving beyond the church walls, preaching on the sidewalks and in the places that people were gathering. Those were important pieces of our history. And those pieces of our history help us become who we are today. So let me ask you this. What is your history? As we're thinking about our faith, our denomination's history, what is your history? Who are the people who were influential for you as a child as you were growing up in your faith? Who are the people that you didn't even know? Maybe your great-grandparents and the legacy that they have of faith that has led you to where you are. History is really important in Scripture. We see these stories of moments, monumental moments, where then they pick up these rocks and they create a monument and they name that space to help them remember. And that then they can bring their children back to these monuments to help them remember the stories, remember that God is faithful. And in Psalm 78, verses 3 through 4, we hear things that we have heard and known, that our fathers and mothers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. You see, remembering our history reminds us that God is present with us, that God is doing amazing and glorious things in our midst, and it helps us to then be able to share that with those who come, who might not understand or have yet seen God at work, but can know that God is present with them throughout their life, just as God has been present with us. So what are the stories that are really important for us to remember? Well, I think for us at Parker United Methodist Church, our story is really important to remember is our history, the history of who we have been in the Parker community. The way that we had set down roots as one of the first churches in the community, opened its doors to children to be able to come and to do Sunday school classes, had a huge impact on having musical things. And that has been part of our history in the church since the beginning. Our history includes reaching out into our community, doing things, building organizations like the Parker Task Force or the Women's Crisis Shelter, or even being a part of Praying Hands Ranch, or all these other organizations that are seeking to help people in the community. And then this foundation that we have of children and youth, and the importance that we have found in having a space that helps them know who God is in their lives, that starts them out understanding that they are loved by God, and then that they're able to grow up in the church and then be able to go out into the world and to continue sharing those lessons that they learned in our space out in the world. So this Sunday in worship service, we are celebrating our graduates. We have at least 10 graduates that we know of, and I'm sure that there are others who have been touched by the work of this church, who have grown up in this church or who have been there serving their last few years, who are tied to us. And this church has loved them and nurtured them, has taught them about God's love, and they're about to go out into the world to continue to live and hopefully carry those memories that they have built with us and those lessons that they have learned, be able to take those with them and to share them with others. See, history is so important. It builds us a firm foundation, a foundation that is built upon a rock, the rock of God. And if we can remember those stories, if we can tell those stories to our children, to our children's children, then they will be able to see how God was at work in our lives and how God maybe is still at work in theirs. I don't know about you, but sometimes it's hard for me to see God in this moment, right? I mean, I'm sitting here in my kitchen and looking out one of my favorite views, which is my backyard. I was just watching bluebirds chase each other, right? I can see God at work in that moment, but in the stressful moments of life, sometimes it's hard for me to see God at work. But the history, the stories that people have told me of how they have experienced God, of how they have seen God at work in my life, those moments of sharing that history have helped me have my eyes open to the ways that God is working right now in our midst, in our world, in our community, even in my life. So for us, it's important to think about the history, to hold on to those stories, those monuments where we have seen God at work, and then to share those stories with others so that we can continue to build upon the history and the legacy that others have left us, but also so that future generations can know the love of God that is with them even when they can't see it or feel it. So I encourage you to share your stories. What is your history at Parker United Methodist Church? I asked that question online on Sunday, and I loved hearing the stories about how some people's history started over at the Main Street old schoolhouse, and how they remember walking over the candles and the Bible over from the old schoolhouse to where we're meeting now. Or the stories of packing meals and that history that they had working with Feed My Starving Children and packing meals for people all around the world. Or the history of the preschool, those who have been teaching there for years and years, who remember children who we now see come back as adults. What is your history at Parker United Methodist Church? How has that influenced your life and who you are today? And If maybe you don't have a long history at Parker United Methodist Church, what is your faith history? When did you first start noticing and experiencing God's love? Was it in a faith community or was it out in the world? How has God been a part of your life before you were even born? How has God planted seeds that have grown that you now have been able to take and to nurture and to continue on for generations to come? Let us hold on to our history, to celebrate our history, to think about the lessons that we learn from John Wesley and Charles Wesley as they wrestled and struggled with their faith, the methods that they have given us to stand upon, of reading scripture, of joining together with one another in song and worship, of prayer, of going out into the world and working for meeting people where they are. Let us hold on to our history so that we can share that with generations to come.